The sun had already gone down behind the hills, leaving the world in shades of gray and silver. The wind moved across the open fields, carrying tiny bits of snow that danced in the air. Inside a small wooden house at the edge of the valley, Thomas sat near the fireplace, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He had lived alone on that ranch for almost 10 years. After his wife passed away, silence became his only company. The only sounds he heard were the rustling of dry grass, the creaking of the windmill, and the low mooing of his cattle. Sometimes he would talk to them just to hear his own voice. It had been a hard winter that year. The roads were covered in ice, and most people stayed inside their homes. Thomas had stocked enough food and firewood to last him through the storm. He had no reason to expect visitors. No one ever came out that far. That night, the wind began to howl louder than usual. Snow fell in thick sheets covering the windows and fences. Thomas stood up and checked the doors. He was about to return to his chair when he heard something strange. A faint sound like someone crying or calling out. At first he thought it was the wind. But then it came again. "Please, help me." He froze. The voice was weak but real. It sounded like a woman. He stepped closer to the door, his heart suddenly pounding. The voice came again, softer this time, carried by the storm. Thomas grabbed his coat, hat, and a lantern. When he opened the door, the freezing wind hit him hard, stealing his breath. He raised the lantern, squinting through the blowing snow. At first he saw nothing but white. Then something moved near the fence, a small shape lying on the ground. He rushed forward, his boots sinking deep into the snow. When he reached the figure, he saw a young woman half buried in the drift. Her clothes were torn by the wind, her hands trembling, and her face pale from the cold. She was shivering uncontrollably, whispering for help. Hey, you're all right now," he said quickly, kneeling beside her. "You're safe. Come on, let's get you inside." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes were half closed. Thomas lifted her carefully, wrapping his coat around her. She felt as light as a feather, her body cold as ice. He carried her through the snow back to the house, pushing the door open with his shoulder. Inside, the warmth hit them both. He laid her down gently on the couch near the fire. The lantern light flickered across her face. She had a few scratches on her arms and forehead, and her hair was tangled with snow. She looked like she had been running for miles. Thomas hurried to fetch a blanket, wrapping it tightly around her. Then he poured warm water into a cup and held it near her lips. "Drink this slowly," he said softly. The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were bright green, filled with fear and confusion. She took a small sip, coughing a little. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're welcome," Thomas replied gently. "You're safe now." "I'm Thomas. What happened out there?" She tried to speak but couldn't form the words. Tears welled in her eyes. Thomas didn't press her. He just added more wood to the fire and brought her an old sweater to wear. For the next hour she sat quietly near the fire, wrapped in the blanket, staring at the flames. Every now and then she would flinch at a sound, the crackling of wood or the whistling wind outside. Thomas could see she was scared of something, but he didn't ask again. He knew that sometimes silence was the best comfort. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke. "My name's Lily," she said softly. Thomas nodded. "That's a pretty name." She looked down at her hands. I didn't know where else to go. My car broke down miles from here. I tried to walk to the next town, but I lost my way when the snow started falling harder." Thomas frowned. "You walked all that way in this storm? You're lucky I heard you." Lily smiled faintly. "I thought I wouldn't make it. When I saw the light from your window, I just followed it." Thomas felt a strange tightness in his chest. It had been so long since he'd talked to anyone face to face. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to help someone, to be needed again. He gave her a bowl of hot soup and some bread. She ate slowly, thanking him after every bite. The storm outside grew louder, but inside the small cabin it felt warm and peaceful. "You can stay here tonight," Thomas said after a while. "There's an extra room down the hall." "I don't want to trouble you," she said quickly. "It's no trouble," he replied, giving a small smile. "You need to rest. The roads will still be blocked tomorrow. We'll figure things out when the storm clears." Lily hesitated, but then nodded. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "Just stay alive," he said with a light chuckle. For the first time, she smiled, a real, gentle smile that made the room seem brighter. Later that night, after she had gone to the guest room, Thomas sat near the fire again. The wind had started to calm down, but his mind was restless. Who was she really? What was she doing out here in the middle of nowhere? Something about her story didn't sit right. The nearest road was 10 miles away. He had driven it many times. There were no signs of any accident or car trouble earlier that day. He looked toward the hallway where her room was. He could hear her soft breathing, steady now, peaceful. Maybe he was just overthinking. Maybe it was exactly as she said, a lost traveler caught in a storm. Still, his instincts told him there was more to her story. He stood up, poured himself another cup of coffee, and sat back down. For the first time in years, the silence in his cabin didn't feel so heavy. There was another heartbeat inside those walls. The loneliness that had hung over him for so long began to fade, just a little. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the world in white. Inside, two strangers found a small piece of warmth and safety. Before going to bed, Thomas checked on Lily one last time. She was sleeping soundly, her face calm, her hands resting under the blanket. He quietly closed the door and whispered to himself, "You'll be all right now." He returned to his chair, staring at the fire until it burned low. As he drifted toward sleep, he couldn't shake one thought from his mind that maybe, just maybe, fate had brought her to his doorstep for a reason. But as the wind sighed outside and the fire dimmed, he didn't see the small tear that slipped down Lily's cheek as she slept. She wasn't just lost. She was running from something, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm she carried within her heart. Morning came slowly over the snow-covered valley. The world outside Thomas's cabin was silent, blanketed in white. The storm had passed, but the air was still cold enough to sting the skin. Thomas woke early, as he always did, and started a fire in the stove. The smell of coffee soon filled the room. He moved quietly, not wanting to wake Lily. For a few minutes he just watched the fire, listening to the soft crackle of wood. It felt strange to have someone else in the house again. For years he had eaten alone, worked alone, and spoken to no one but the animals. Now the sound of another person's footsteps on the wooden floor brought back memories of a life he thought he had lost forever. A few minutes later, he heard the door open. Lily stepped into the room, wrapped in the same blanket from the night before. She looked better, warmer, though still a little pale. "Morning," Thomas greeted her with a kind smile. "You sleep all right?" She nodded, rubbing her arms. "Yes, better than I thought I would." "Thank you again, Thomas. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." "Don't think about that," he said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "You're safe now, that's what matters." She took the cup with both hands, smiling softly. It's been a long time since someone's cared like this. Thomas didn't know what to say to that. He simply nodded and turned to look out the window. The wind had stopped, but the road was still hidden under snow. "You'll have to stay another day or two," he said after a moment. "The road won't be clear until the sun melts some of it." Lily looked relieved, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of worry she couldn't hide. "I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. "You're not," he replied firmly. "You've had a rough night. Take some time to rest." She smiled again, but Thomas could see that she was distracted, her thoughts far away. The day went on slowly. Thomas went out to feed the animals while Lily stayed inside, helping tidy the small kitchen. She moved quietly, careful not to disturb anything. Every now and then she would glance out the window as if expecting to see something, or someone, out there. When Thomas came back inside, his beard covered in frost, he noticed her standing near the door, staring into the distance. "Something wrong?" he asked. She quickly turned, shaking her head. "No, nothing, just thinking." He didn't believe her, but he didn't press. He had learned long ago that people revealed their truths when they were ready. After lunch, the two of them sat near the fire again. Thomas told her a little about the ranch, how it had belonged to his father, how he grew up here, and how he stayed even after everyone else left for the city. Lily listened quietly, her green eyes following every word. "You must get lonely out here," she said softly. He smiled sadly. "Sometimes, but the quiet helps me think. The animals don't argue and the stars don't judge. That's enough most days. She looked into the fire, her voice low. I used to think peace was silence. Now I know silence can be the loudest thing in the world. Thomas watched her for a long moment. You've been through something, haven't you? He said gently. Lily froze, her hands tightening around her cup. For a while she said nothing. Then, finally, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. I've been running. Not from a place, but from people. From my old life. Thomas didn't ask more. He waited, letting her find her own pace. I used to work in the city, she said slowly. It was busy, noisy, and everyone was always in a hurry. I thought that's what life was supposed to be, rushing, competing, proving yourself. But one day something happened that changed everything. She paused, her voice trembling slightly. Someone close to me betrayed me. I lost my job, my friends, everything. I tried to start again, but it felt like the world kept closing its doors, so I left. I took my car and drove with no plan, no map, just away. Thomas nodded quietly. He didn't know what to say, but his eyes told her he understood. When the storm hit, she continued, I thought maybe it was a sign, that I was meant to stop running. And then I saw your light. She smiled faintly. Maybe that was the sign instead. Thomas felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He didn't say it, but he was grateful too. Her presence had brought something back into his world, something like hope. The rest of the day passed peacefully. They talked a little more, shared stories, and even laughed once or twice. Lily helped him cook dinner, and though the food was simple, it felt like a feast. As night fell, the two sat again by the fire. Outside, the moonlight made the snow sparkle like silver. Lily stared into the flames, her eyes distant again. You know, she said softly, it's strange. When I was out there in the snow, I thought I was going to die. But when I saw your cabin, something told me I'd be safe. I don't know why. Maybe life has a way of leading us where we need to be, Thomas said, even when we don't understand it. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Maybe it led me here for a reason. He didn't answer, but the silence between them was warm this time, not heavy. The next morning the road had begun to clear. The snow had melted enough for travel. Lily stood by the window, watching the sunlight fall on the white fields. She looked calm, but Thomas could tell she was thinking about leaving. You can stay longer if you want, he said. There's no rush. She turned to him, smiling softly. You've already done more for me than I can ever repay. But I think it's time for me to face the world again. He nodded, even though a part of him didn't want her to go. Then I'll drive you to town. No, she said gently. You've done enough. I'll walk to the bus stop once the road's clear. The sun's out now. I'll be fine. Thomas didn't argue. He respected her strength. He helped her pack a small bag with food and warm clothes. Before she left, she paused at the door. Thomas, she said softly, I'll never forget what you did for me. You gave me more than shelter. You reminded me that there are still good people left in this world. He smiled faintly. Take care of yourself, Lily. She hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him. It was a brief, quiet moment, but it said more than words could. Then she turned and began to walk down the snow-covered path. The sun shone on her hair, and for a moment she looked like part of the light itself. Thomas stood there, watching until she disappeared behind the hills. He felt the old silence return, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This time it felt peaceful, almost comforting. He went back inside and sat near the fire. The cup she had used was still on the table. He smiled and whispered to himself, Safe travels, Lily. Days passed and life returned to its quiet rhythm. But something inside Thomas had changed. He started talking to his neighbors again, fixing things around the ranch, even writing letters to old friends. It was as if her presence had woken up something that had been asleep for too long. And sometimes when the wind blew through the valley, carrying echoes of distant voices, Thomas would pause and listen, hoping maybe to hear that same soft plea once more. Please help me. But this time it was only the wind. And he smiled because he knew somewhere out there she didn't need help anymore.